I'd like to talk about a little bit about section 7 or chapter 7 section 1. Chapter 7 is a chapter that deals with the law. And you know I have a specific affection for the law. So this is the first chapter that we're going to start with, and then we're going to move on towards the crime and the project that we normally do when we start this. This is the last step before we get into that project. Now, before we get there, before we actually talk about the American legal system, there's a couple of preliminary things that we have to do. Number one is we have to understand what the law is. We take it for granted. We wake up every day and we have to follow the law, whether we know it or we don't. But we really never take the time to find out what's the law. Now, the law is a set of rules that give us guidelines on how to properly behave in society. The law allows us to be a group of people because it sets boundaries around each individual so that I can do my thing while you're doing your thing. Okay? The law gives us the ability to be able to predict the outcome of our actions with regards to other people. That's what the law is. How did the law get started? Nobody really knows how the law got started. There's ideas. As a matter of fact, there was a guy a long time ago. His name was Hobbes. And Hobbes lived during a period of time in which there weren't any iPads, there weren't any cell phones or computers or televisions. So Hobbes spent a great deal of time thinking. And he invested a lot of that time thinking about how societies first formed. He didn't have a clue because he wasn't looking at any particular thing. He was just using his mind to figure it out. And Hobbes originally felt that society at the very beginning was a very difficult place to live because there was no predictability. So generally, the rule that applied was the biggest and the baddest were the ones that ruled the day. And the smallest and the weakest didn't fare so well. Or at least didn't fare so well during the day. You see, the biggest and the baddest would do whatever it was that they wanted. They would trample all over the weakest. And the weakest, what would they have to do? They'd have to wait until the biggest and the baddest went to sleep and then clobber them over the head. So there was this constant state of tension between the powerful and the weak. And nobody really enjoyed it. So at some point in time, they decided that in order for them to kind of be able to live in a group, they had to resolve this. And they entered into an agreement. And we call that agreement a social compact. Okay? Some of us call that agreement a constitution. So perhaps that's where the laws began to start growing that dictated and allowed people to do things as long as they didn't interrupt the way that other people were doing. So the first few laws must have been very simple. And let me use this language and see if you can identify with it. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. It sounds familiar because we use those, or they're very familiar from the Ten Commandments. You see, the Ten Commandments are exactly that. A set of guidelines, a set of rules. But what many people don't understand is that the Ten Commandments were probably not the first written set of rules. You all know the story about Moses and going up to the mountain of Sinai and getting a tablet of 10 rules from God. Well, you see, that tablet of 10 rules isn't the oldest set of laws. As a matter of fact, the oldest set of laws that we have today were written a long time ago in Persia by a king named Hammurabi. And Hammurabi came up with these rules, and they probably predated Hammurabi, but what he did is he wrote them down. Now, writing them down doesn't seem to be a big deal today, because we write everything down. But back then, it was a big deal for this reason. People that were far away from the king didn't have the ability to ask the king what the laws are. What should I do under these circumstances? So the groups of societies couldn't grow very big. They could only grow as big as the ability for somebody to consult with the king as to what the rules were. But when Hammurabi wrote his rules down, he was able to put those rules in the different portions of his empire, allowing his citizens not to have to go to him, allowing his citizens to refer to this set of rules that he had established. So the Hammurabi Code is the oldest set of rules that we have found. Now, be careful, because I didn't say the oldest set of rules, or even the oldest set of written rules, because archaeology is like that. We're discovering things every day. But right now, those are it. Now, one of the things that you have to know about laws is that law is like a family. It's divided into two. So think about a big sphere or circle and divide it into two. On one side, you have what are called criminal laws. Laws that are intended to dictate behavior that if it is not followed, society punishes you. Okay. The other side are civil laws. These civil laws are intended to allow people to be able to transact with each other, and when there's a violation, it's not criminal, you don't go to jail, but there has to be some sort of compensation, some sort of benefit. And among these civil things, you have what some of you may think about contracts. Contracts are legally enforceable agreements where two parties agree to do something. If one party doesn't agree, they can go to a judge and say, look, judge, we agreed to do this. This person didn't do it. Give us some relief or give us some remedy for that. It's not criminal, but the judge will give you some remedy. Will either compensate you with money from that side that didn't comply, or will ask that side or require that side to do what they said that they were going to do. Now, the difference between civil law and criminal law is that a criminal law, when a crime is committed, it is considered to be a violation against society. So, when someone, for example, hits somebody else, a criminal law says, when you hit that person, yes, that person was injured, but your action hurt all of society. All of us are hurt because you were willing to go outside of the law. And society cannot permit people to take the law into their own hands, and therefore punishes that behavior. Civil law is different. Civil law is viewed by, you did a wrong to this person, not to all of society, but to an individual person. So that individual person can ask the court for relief or for some remedy based on what you did. So the difference between criminal law and civil law is who brings the charges. In criminal law, it is the government. In civil law, it's the individual parties that bring the action to court. So those are the areas that we're going to explore a little bit about in chapter 7, section 1. And we're going to be moving towards, at the end, in chapter 7, section 3, which we should have either today, tomorrow, or the day after. We're going to be talking about the Supreme Court and how the law is dealt with here in the United States. I do need to tell you that there are some distinctions in criminal law. Distinctions means differences, things that we need to know about. Now, as you know, there are some criminal laws that everybody knows is wrongful behavior. You go to South Africa and you say to someone in the street that you don't know about, doesn't know anything about the law, if you kill somebody, is that wrong and punishable? And they're going to tell you, yes. You get on a plane and you go to Peru. And you get out of the plane, you find the first Peruvian there, and you say to the Peruvian, if you kill somebody, is it against the law? The Peruvian's going to say, sí. Okay? If you go to Germany and ask somebody, if you kill somebody, is it against the law? They're going to say, duh. Yes. Because there's some laws that are universal, okay? We call them, and I'm going to give you a Latin term, okay? So you can wow your parents. The Latin term is malum in se. Malum is Latin for mal, and in Spanish we know that mal is considered to be wrong, but really the translation is evil. Malum is evil. In se really means in and of itself. In Spanish we would say en sí. Malum in se crimes are evil in and of themselves, and they're universal. You go to the four corners of the world and they're recognized. Some of those would be murder, battery, theft. Those would be malum in se. There are some crimes, the other category of crimes, are crimes because society tells you that they're wrong. Here I'm going to tell you a little story about my trip to Japan. I went to Japan a number of years ago on a legal trip, and I was going to cross the street from my hotel to the embassy of the United States that was across the street. And as I was going to venture across the street, I feel a hand grabbing my shoulder, and I kind of look back, and I see the attorney for the other side, who I only met once, grabbing my shoulder. And I was very perplexed. Why is this man grabbing my shoulder? And I learned that he was doing me a favor. And I said, "Can I help you?" He says, "Yes." "Do you know where you're at?" I kind of looked around, thought it was a goofy question, and said, "Yeah, I'm in Japan." He goes, "Exactly. In Japan, you cross the street at the corner. This is jaywalking." I know what jaywalking is. We have jaywalking laws in the United States. We don't enforce them a lot. In Japan, apparently they do. Jaywalking is a crime because society tells you it's a crime. You know, we were born with, okay, you can't cross the street here because you're going to go to jail. Okay? So those types of crimes that are crimes because society tells you that they're wrong are called malum prohibitum. Malum, again, bad, because society prohibits it. Malum prohibitum. And prohibitum comes from, and you know the English word that comes from the same root, prohibition, to prohibit action. Malum, it's bad because it's been prohibited. And through time, things like drinking alcohol is malum prohibitum. At one point in time in the United States, drinking alcohol was illegal. Why? Because the Constitution said so. Now, it's legal.